Hey, getting fellas, we're going back to therapy. Thanks for joining me for our sixth episode in the addiction block. Today, we are really excited to start out this week's episode previewing the conference championship game. Congratulations to my good friend and our social media manager, Mike, and the rest of his Canadian brethren on the Buffalo Bills' appearance in the conference title game. We're going to break down each team's Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee. It's the guy on the team nominated by his team as like the best in the community kind of guy, as a way of really spinning in some mental health into the conference championship talk. Really fortunate to be joined again by our good friend Brian Bowen, a counselor at Cedar in the addiction world, where he's going to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous. Because again, to be both a patient and a practitioner in this business is very common. I learned a ton about AA, and if you've never really been involved in it, I recommend you stick around for the interview. And we will wrap, because Monday this week was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We're going to be inducting the good Reverend into the Bromotions Hall of Fame to end the show. All right, as usual, let's go. Boys. Slep, how you feeling?
I am on top of the world. With the game tonight, because we're recording before the national championship, all my feelings could just be destroyed. But right now, I feel great.
Would you rather have a Bills Super Bowl or a Buckeyes national championship?
Bills Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That's like
somebody asked me that about the Bengals a few years ago, and they were in it, and I said I'd probably trade 2 for 1. Maybe more. I mean, a Super Bowl is just it's the pinnacle. And unfortunately, Michael, you and I do not know about that pinnacle.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the city can survive it if we win a Super Bowl, but like it's always nice to. So I don't know. I really don't know.
How's the city feeling? What's the vibe today in snowy Buffalo?
Everyone's on to KC. We're on to KC already. This is the one that you got to slay your demons. This is the one that you gotta get this.
Beat the bad man, as they said on PNT. Go beat the bad man.
Yeah, exactly. It was nice to win a game that the Bills normally lose. Last night was a game with the circumstances. All of the things that happened to Baltimore usually happen to Buffalo. So it was kind of nice to have that.
Michael, what DBT skill did you use on that third down play when Josh Allen almost pitched it back to James Cook for no damn reason? How did you help yourself calm?
I just kind of stared off into space, to be honest.
It's not a skill. Dissociating that.
I mean, I didn't have anything. I kind of just stared in disbelief, and then let Tony Romo tell me that it was going to be okay. It was a relief though to see that he's grown.
Not his most present moment, but yes, he is better. He's grown from his.
I would say the opposite. I would say almost not his most.
He's an engaged man, staunchly in his mid-20s. Yeah, he's a grown up.
He said, "You know what? I'm not going to pitch this ball back 12 yards, possibly pick up a yard. I'm going to wait for the next down." So it's good. It felt great.
This week, guys, we are going to talk about the conference championship games. Noting our episodes come out on Wednesday. So we're gonna use a mental health spin, kind of highlighting these guys as more than just ball players. We want to more than just athletes, to steal that campaign slogan. And so we're going to preview the conference championship games by focusing on each team's Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee. If you are not a huge NFL person, then to know that each NFL team, all 32, nominates someone each year for the Walter Payton Man of the Year trophy. And then one person ends up winning it from all the teams overall. But even to be nominated is really, really special. And you'll see on guys' uniforms, the person who is nominated has it's a gold statue, Walter Payton, on their chest, meaning they were the nominee. Richie, didn't Cam Hayward always gets it for the Steelers? I feel like I've been seeing that shit on him every year.
Yes, for as long as I can remember, I think he's been our nominee.
Yeah, Ohio State Buckeye, former classmate of mine. When we took the philosophy of race together the quarter he got drafted, and boy oh boy did his outfit change when he after he got drafted. His clothing was much different. So we're gonna start with the AFC games. Mike will be talking about the Bills and Richie about the Chiefs, and then I'll be scooping up both NFC guys. So Mike, as the only one of us on the pod with our team left in it, start with the Bills nominee.
First off, it feels great to hear that. I just, again, I hope we keep going. I got to change my headgear though, because we're going to talk about Dion Dawkins, aka the Snowman. So I've got my already Snow University hat ready to go here. The Bills nominee, it's his third nomination, is Dion Dawkins. And there's a lot to say about him. His big moment, at least that from what I saw, what I thought was actually back when he was in college, when he was at Temple. He got in an altercation. He was defending a teammate, ended up going and sitting in jail for 2 days. And Matt Rule, who is now the Nebraska head coach,
Baylor to the Panthers. Yep.
Yep. So he was the coach at the time, and he kind of gave him that second shot. And from there, Dion ran with it. He took football, understood that this is not something that everyone's afforded to. And then when he was drafted by the Bills, he really embraced the city. But then a tragedy struck a few years back at the grocery store Tops. There was the Tops shooting, which was on the east side of Buffalo, and primarily affected African Americans all over the community. But that was a targeted attack, and he took that to heart. And he's started to give back, but he's got a couple different groups that he's put together that he gives back through, and he's really embraced the city. And then one little piece too: if he doesn't come in 2017 and do as well as he can, then the Bills can't trade Cordy Glenn to the Bengals in order to get the draft capital to move up for Joshua Patrick Allen.
We gave up a first-round pick for Cordy Glenn, did we not?
Yeah, I think there was a swap somewhere in there. However, if he doesn't give you the confidence that he can be your guy, because Cordy Glenn was good, but he wasn't.
He was a starting level player. There was a big debate: how much do you give up for a functional starting tackle?
Yeah, he just wasn't your franchise left guy. So that was, I don't know what you do in this situation. So it all kind of comes full circle, and then him and Josh are buddies. But I hope I didn't.
He's been on PMT. He seems like a good dude. As we talk about, like kinder, gentler brother. Seems really authentic. Yeah. Seems like he's pretty honest and vulnerable. Talk about things pretty openly.
Very much his authentic self. So I hope I didn't butcher, him giving back and all that stuff in terms of his organizations. Just like Josh Allen, it's just a perfect fit.
Well, at minimum, it'll be difficult to find another candidate his size, as Dion Dawkins is a big dude. Richie, who's the Chiefs nominee?
Who else would it be? It's Travis Kelce. Come on, bro.
Oh, I mean, little known guy.
Guy. Dude, he's got the KGB in his blood. Jason Kelce, BHoF member. Of course, it's going to be Travis Kelce.
Of course.
And he won it this year. He was the man of the year. He got $35,000 for his charity, 87 in running, which helps inner city kids. He built a school to help them assess, careers, trade schools, that kind of thing. So yeah, he's done great things. This is his second time being dominated. He's dating Taylor Swift, so, he has to put it on for the ladies too.
Seems like there may have been a little NFL script work, as we like to talk about, to make this happen.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah. No, we know Travis Kelce's a good dude. I think it's really been cool to see him grow throughout his career. It's fun. If you haven't listened to much of the show, our good friend Chef Max grew up with the Kelces in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And so he talks about Travis when he was a teenager as just such a, you knew he was smart, but couldn't get it together, but just like a big lovable oaf. I mean, we've seen much more of that, obviously, from Travis, and seen his full side and how smart he really is over the years. So no surprise there that he's a good dude. As apples and trees with Jason Kelce, he's always known as one of the best guys in the league. Switching over to the NFC, we got a couple guys, and we know who's going to lose this. If you know these two guys in advance on this show, who's going to lose. So we'll start with the Washington Commanders and their nominee, Bobby Wagner. Big name, Bobby. He's in his 13th year in the league from Utah State University. People remember him primarily for his decade on the Seattle Seahawks, where he was in that Legion of Boom era and a Super Bowl winner when Pete Carroll was the coach there. To the Commanders this year, this is his first year on the Commanders in 2024. And man, talk about bringing experience, leadership, and winning character to a truly talent-starved defense. I mean, they're trading Chase Young for pennies. They've got, Jonathan Allen and some of that stuff inside. But to have a brain and experience on that team is probably one of the core reasons they've been able to get this far. Been well known for working in the community for a long time. He has his Inspiring Futures initiative that demonstrates his focus on empowering young people, mentoring at-risk youth, and providing them with tools for success. His main focus with the kids are on resilience, goal setting, and self-belief. Outside of that, he does a lot of social justice work and racial justice and economic equality. And no dummy himself, he enrolled in an MBA program last January at Howard and is looking to do entrepreneurship. Apparently, he does well in stock market and investing, that he might want to work high up in the league someday. He did a full day where he shadowed Roger Goodell. So smart dude, Bobby Wagner. I mean, obviously, he's dragging that Commanders defense all the way to the conference championship.
It's funny. He's a name that I forget is on Washington, and then you watch the game, you're like, oh yeah, that's where he is, and he just makes plays.
He had another good year. Yeah,
no, he's been great. He's just kind of, it's quiet. He has kind of quietly. There's so much Jaden Daniels love. They don't really talk about.
Yeah. Bobby. The Philadelphia Eagles nominee is known good guy Brandon Graham in his 15th year, all for the Eagles. Hails out of the University of Michigan, hometown Detroit. Boo. Really, Brandon Graham is just known as a model of consistency. His presence alone was a reason that the Eagles felt comfortable drafting Jalen Carter out of Georgia, and we see what a monster he's been. Fun fact about Brandon Graham is he has played in the most regular season games in Eagles history and is one of only 7 active players to have played in 200-plus games, which is a fun list if you want to go look that up. So to quote head coach Nick Sirianni, he lights up the room. That's just the personality that he has, always smiling, always in an upbeat mood. You want to be around people like that. Team Graham is Brandon's community fund, offers times and resources to people in Detroit and Philadelphia. A big focus on mentoring children, providing clothes and food to families in need. He's been known with his involvement in the Eagles Autism Foundation, a big advocacy organization there, where he's been a big part of that since 2018. Just wanted to give one final shout out about Brandon Graham. He was voted by the Philadelphia Visitor Center the first ever most valuable Philadelphian, somebody from the Philadelphia award. So the first time they gave that award out, Brandon Graham won it. So that's pretty cool. I think if you paid attention, he's been really well known as a great guy his whole career, and just like shows that a lot of these guys, when they're thoughtful, kind, they're taking care of themselves, they're treating people right. If you're a good influence in the locker room and people like you and you're kind, people are going to want to keep you on teams. You're going to get signed. You're going to have a role. So no surprise here that we've heard from, all these guys must be 10-year vets. Dion Dawkins would be the closest. He's been in the league for at least 6-7 years, right?
17, so he's got a little.
Yeah, so he's going on it too, right? So how are we feeling about the games, boys? Should be an exciting championship Sunday.
I'm confident.
Oh, okay.
Okay, are you more confident in the Bills or the Buckeyes?
Buckeyes.
I was talking about the Bills in that first statement.
I
know that.
I know.
Okay.
But, if you're going to ask me Bills or Buckeyes, I'm more confident in the Buckeyes tonight than I am the Bills on Sunday. But I'm,
confident in both.
Be true.
Yeah.
I'm
both
and.
and.
Buckeyes ready? I'm confident in the Buckeyes.
It's very dialectical.
And I'm confident in the Bills. And I know that's not how that works.
My heart, as evidenced by my Josh Allen socks on Slap. These were a gift from Mike back in the day. We know feet too well on the internet. No free feet pics. Got to censor that with Josh's face. And so my heart is pulling for the Bills. If I were a betting man, which I'm not, I think I'd be betting on the Chiefs. I just because they're evil. They're evil. All those spiritual things that, are worth us paying attention to out in the world point to the Chiefs. Rich, you got an AFC thought?
No. Mahomes is inevitable. He's Thanos.
That's why
it's not really fun to pick against him. I'm rooting for you, Slep.
4.5?
No, 1.5.
Oh, okay. I thought Vegas. I was going to say that's way more. Okay, that makes more sense. Commanders and Eagles. For me, another game that my heart will pull Commanders, and yet I think my wallet would pull Eagles. Should be a lame Super Bowl, Chiefs-Eagles. Not really feeling it. Not even a Kelsey Bowl this time.
Yeah.
It would be nice. Again, I don't mind having that prime time. That's how it's how it always is, right? NFC's always first, AFC second. It would be nice if those games were flipped from a standpoint of, at least for me, like obviously if the Bills win, I don't care who the opponent is, because I feel like that's a fun matchup regardless. That's not the boring Chiefs. Everyone's kind of gotten whatever. But yeah, otherwise I want Commanders Chiefs. Like if it's going to be the Chiefs, I want the Commanders on the other side. That's a lot more exciting. Although probably a lot more likely that it becomes another Chiefs Super Bowl. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd rather play the Commanders, I assume.
I'm happy the Bills are in it. Every other team.
I don't see Matt Milano doing particularly well shadowing Jaden Daniels. Jalen Hurts, he could probably keep up with a little more.
You don't know Matt Milano. You don't know the Cookie Monster.
Jaden Daniels is very fast. That's not.
So is Lamar.
Yeah, Lamar didn't run a lot. It's true.
He did not. And fun fact: Derrick Henry. They were 10-0. They were undefeated when Derrick Henry has over 85 yards of rushing.
We had 84. Yeah.
And lost a step there on that return there. That was nice.
Hey, he held on to the ball. That's all that mattered. I think that was probably his top priority. Smart cookie, former Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee, Von Miller. Any closing thoughts, boys, other than let's go Bucks? T-minus 2 hours till kickoff. Slep? OH? All right, we'll be back after the break to see a familiar face, Brian Bowen. He's going to be talking to us about Alcoholics Anonymous, getting a real close look at something that I frankly didn't know anything about and feel like I learned a ton in this interview. So catch y'all after the break. Welcome back, fellas. We're here to interview a familiar face, our good friend Brian Bowen, LPCC. He is a behavioral health counselor at the Cedar Rehabilitation Center that we recently toured, and we're thankful to have Brian back because he is also a group leader of Alcoholics Anonymous programs. Brian, how you doing, friend? How you feeling about the Eagles-Rams after your first round win this weekend?
Yeah, actually, I don't know why, but I like that matchup a lot better than I guess it would have been. I don't know who else it would have been. Was it the Commanders? But
yeah, with the reseeding, if the Commanders had won, you'd have played the Vikings. And...
that's right. Yeah, I'm actually I was happier about the matchup with the Rams versus the Vikings. So we'll see. Who knows?
We will see. Yeah, they look pretty good. Sean McVay's bag of tricks, as they'll say. You ever thought about you and McVay having similar hair vibes? I cut gel up.
A little bit, yeah. He's got a little bit of a shorter beard going on. Maybe I have some more gray, and I think he might be younger than me. But yeah, there's some similarities.
Okay. Hey, you know what? If that's the comp you're getting, he's probably, him, LaFleur, the most attractive coaches in the NFL. Not a bad comp. Not a bad comp.
I'll take it.
All right, so Brian, thank you so much. We reflected on this for a bit, and I've touched on it in some other episodes. I know shockingly little about AA, and the more research I've done for this interview with you, the more I've learned that I don't know anything. So let's kind of assume that the general public and our audience probably hasn't had much exposure to AA, and I don't want to minimize those that have, but, I think we're starting from scratch. Can you introduce Alcoholics Anonymous to our audience?
Yes, I can do that. And I think the way I'm going to start is by sharing Tradition 11. Tradition 11 comes from the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. I'm actually going to be referring to what's called the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, which I can just read real quickly, that Alcoholics Anonymous first published the 12 and 12, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions in 1953. So Bill W., who along with Dr. Bob S., who founded AA in 1935, wrote this book to share 18 years of collective experience within the fellowship on how AA members recover and how our society functions. So that's where I'm going to be pulling most of my reading from this book, but I do want to start with Tradition 11. It's very important. I'll just read the whole thing. So our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. And then I'll read the longer version, which won't take that long. Public relations are important to AA. Good public relations save lives. We seek publicity for AA principles, not AA members. The press has cooperated. Personal anonymity at the public level is the cornerstone of our public relations policy. 11 Tradition is a constant reminder that personal ambition has no place in AA. Each member becomes an active guardian of our fellowship. And the reason I read that first is because I'm not like a spokesperson for AA. I'm not really representing AA per se. I'm just speaking from my, as we say in Alcoholics Anonymous, my experience, strength, and hope. You'll probably hear that if you go to AA meetings, and just once, if you're part of the fellowship, you'll hear that again and again, that we speak from experience, strength, and hope. And so this is what I'm doing today, has nothing to do with me and my I'm not promoting AA per se. I'm just presenting the information. And if it's attractive to some, then we hope that they latch onto it and give it a shot.
Yeah. Well, Brian, if this episode helps to make it big, whatever profits we get, that we've made no money so far, zero, so you will not become rich, that we can guarantee that. But also, just thinking about it, Brian, I think I was talking to you about this. Like, I've asked around, and I've had a handful of people who are like, well, how could I do that if I'm supposed to remain anonymous? Like, how can I? So Brian and I did talk a lot about that idea, that tradition there of like, okay, if Brian's name, we weren't going to put him behind like a black screen and change his voice. It didn't really make much sense, but just kind of pointing out like, hey, this is about education, not self-promotion, not meant to be a ladder to get the members famous, which is that humble roots that, I think we know enough about AA, even as the lay public, that, humility is a big part of it.
Yeah. I have Brian B in my little box there. That's just to kind of honor the anonymity of AA. But I'm okay with the folks knowing that my last name's Bowen. So, I think when it comes to that anonymity, like when you go to the meetings and you're part of the fellowship, that's where we really focus on honoring that. I have no problem. I think to some degree, this is just my personal kind of experience with it, is I'm okay with people knowing like who I am and what I'm a part of. Not for any self gain, but just for the simple fact that if people know me, then maybe that'll open up conversations and that'll develop relationships so that I can speak a little bit more about, my journey and what I'm doing to stay in recovery. So yeah, I'll just kind of leave that there. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's a smooth transition as you talked about the 12 steps and 12 traditions. What is a 12-step program? What is the foundation of AA as you see it?
Yeah, and so again, I'll refer to the book to kind of just give you a little snippet of the history. Alcoholics Anonymous is a worldwide fellowship of more than, now it's millions. It says this is like an older version, but millions of alcoholic men and women who are banded together to solve their common problems and to help fellow sufferers in recovery from that age-old, baffling malady, alcoholism. And, in this book, I'll refer to it as alcoholism. In the clinical world, it referred to it to alcohol use disorder. I'm not going to get, wrapped around anything with that. We'll refer to it as alcoholism for here. And so AA...
Do you guys still do like, I'm an alcoholic? Because I don't know if I use that lingo as much, just while we're on lingo.
That's a great question. I think it's a good way to kind of open up, like, even the discussion here about what the 12 steps actually are and where we even begin with that. So we begin in step 1, right? We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. And so, in all my transparency, I had a heck of a time identifying myself as an alcoholic. I did not want to say that. I did not want to say it. I didn't say it for a long time. And you don't have to say it. That's the whole thing. Like, to your question, you don't have to come up into a meeting and say, hey, my name is Brian and I'm an alcoholic. You don't. And, you're not going to, I would hope you're not going to get any flack for that.
Yeah.
So
I'm picturing the scene from Half Baked where Dave Chappelle goes to like the NA meeting and says there's a problem with weed, and then the whole thing goes sideways. So I don't know why that's the first thing that jumped into my head, but
is that where
I do think that like that perception of like, I go to my MERS meeting and stand up and go, hi, I'm Steven and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody goes, hi, Steven. Like, that is probably my perception of what people's perception of an AA meeting is when you first go.
Yeah. And, that is part of it. That absolutely is part of it. And that is I want to say maybe the structure for like a regular meeting. When I say regular meeting, there's all kinds of different meetings. Like, you have just your standard regular meeting where, you go around the room, you do introductions, you do some readings from maybe the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book or other approved literature. And then there's a time for sharing. But there's other meetings too, like step studies and like 12 and 12 studies and things like that. But bringing it back to kind of that first step, step 1 of, introducing myself as an alcoholic, that has to do, I think, for me at least, again, for me, is that idea of powerlessness. Like, I'm admitting this, for so long, I was denying it. I was hiding it. It was all a secret. I was living a double life. There was no way I was going to admit that I was an alcoholic, because for me, there was a lot of shame and guilt tied to that. So there's power in that, there's power in saying that out loud in front of a group of people that get it, that understand it, that they can say, oh, okay, I'm dealing with the same problem. So that was step 1. We could talk all day about each step, but we could devote an episode to each step. But, that idea of admitting powerlessness and that my life had become unmanageable is a place of vulnerability and courage, I think, to step into that.
Do you think it's easier generally? I know you're asking for you. Do you think it was generally easier for you to say I'm powerless over this than to give the full label? Like, just that part is like, it's more objective. And I can see that being easier for people.
Yeah. And I do see that, I hear that, I should say, like in meetings, like, I'm powerless over this stuff, or I'm powerless over this problem, or whatever it is. Some folks introduce themselves by saying, hey, I'm Brian. I'm a member of the AA fellowship, and I'm powerless over alcohol, And so, yeah, there's whatever's kind of resonating the most with that person, I think is going to be helpful to them. Now, obviously there is that degree of like, am I still in denial? Am I fully kind of surrendering this idea of my issue to higher power or whatever, which I'm sure we'll get into that too. But yeah.
Yeah, Brian, you talked about, am I still in denial? I'm interested. I was thinking of this as we continue that stages of change model thinking, and I really just want that hammered home for our audience, because it's not just substances where that stuff comes up, any really behavior change. In fact, I just had a patient where this week we had to admit that she is powerless over shopping. and is having to give her credit card up and access to her bank account. And it wasn't about a shopaholic. It was just about admitting, like, you do not have control over this right now, and therefore this should not be in your hands. Brian, as we're continuing with this like stages of change model that I really want people to see and understand, where do you see AA fitting in? Because I put it as like a maintenance step, because you're out, you're not in treatment, but is that?
Well, I mean, I think it depends really on where the person's at, where they're like how they're coming into the program, how much experience they've had in recovery, what they've done in the past, kind of really their attitude and their mindset of where they are with regard to their addiction. So I can just, kind of read the first 3 steps and explain them kind of as like a parallel process with regard to stage of change, right? Maybe pre-contemplation to contemplation. So step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So obviously you already kind of hear some higher power language in there. But as far as like, the steps as it pertains to stages of change, in my experience, when I worked steps 1, 2, and 3, that was changing my attitude, changing my attitude about my life, really, not just like my recovery, not just my addiction to alcohol, but just my life. Like, am I looking at, like, what lens am I looking through the world? How am I seeing these things? And so steps 1, 2, and 3 were kind of like, okay, moving from denial to, no, I don't really think I have a problem, to admitting it. And then in a way, I'm using the word, like this spiritual principle of surrender, like, surrendering my old beliefs to something or someone else, right? So that's those 3 steps for me were really critical in setting the stage for steps 4 and 5, which 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, and then 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrong. So that's kind of moving into what I would say would be that planning stage. Okay, now I'm actually writing out like all of my resentments, all of my fears, people, places, institutions, all these things and people that I have some kind of resentment or anger or harboring some kind of reservation against, writing them all out. Then literally, this is what I did. I wrote them all out, reviewed them with my sponsor, and then read them out loud to him. But before I did that, because you notice in step 5, it said admitted to God. So, my higher power, I spent time in prayer and meditation and did that with my higher power. And then I did it out loud with my sponsor. And, that process was not easy. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian, that preparation stage really is a lot what this sounds like, which is like thinking, what may have led these problems to me? Where am I holding this ill will? And, you're talking about that surrender. Makes me think a lot about the DBT principle of radical acceptance.
Yes.
With patients all the time, they're like, I hold grudges. I can't just let things go. And I try to remind people, like, it's a skill like anything. And so here's Brian, a successful military career, a good person. And even he's like, yeah, I had to like learn and practice the idea of surrender, the idea of radical acceptance. This is what it is. This is where I'm at.
Yeah. And that's a great point that, this term surrender can kind of be nebulous sometimes, and like, again, speaking from my own experience with this, surrender to me, I didn't really know what that meant in the beginning, but to me, that means an action, right? And so kind of going back to that step 4 and step 5, I'm actually taking an action. I'm not just thinking about it in some kind of theoretical mindset, right? I'm taking a pen, I'm putting it to paper, and I'm writing these things down, right? All of these resentments, all these fears that I had, and I mean, to some degrees still have, right? And so steps 5 and 6 were really critical for me to like, it's pretty cathartic actually. That for me, after I did step 5 was a really like, I actually just said all of this out loud to somebody for the very first time.
And I was going to say probably the first time you'd done it, and certainly the first time it was out of your head and onto paper, which is such a, when you read something in a book that seems attuned to you or your experience, when you journal and people reread those passages, I mean, it hits. Oh, yeah. See it on paper versus rolling around in your noodle.
Yeah. And so, steps 4 and 5, and even like, I'll get into steps 6 and 7. This is still kind of what I would consider for me of that planning, that preparation stage, right? Because step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. And then step 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings, which those are, I love the way Bill W. writes that, because it's really, in a way, he's saying that kind of the same thing, defects of character and then shortcomings. But so now this is the point where it's like, okay, is my higher power actually going to remove all these things? Well, in my understanding is he might be able to. Of course he can. He's my higher power, but he wants me to cooperate with him in that. So I still have to kind of take this action of surrendering my cravings, my fears, my temptations, whatever's coming up. I have to give that over to my higher power. I have to call my sponsor. I have to do more inventorying. I have to write these things out. So again, this is kind of planning for that action to maintenance stage, because steps 10 through 12 is what I consider in my own experience of, working the steps also in treatment is 10, 11, and 12 are now my maintenance steps. And you hear folks in meetings sometimes, like when they kind of check in, they're like, yeah, I'm living steps 10 through 12. It's like, what does that mean? That's where I think for me, steps 10 through 12, where it transfers from working the steps as a program to now becoming part of my life. Like this is my lifestyle. Like I don't just say, well, I'm working the steps. Like my life reflects the steps, if that makes sense.
And that's probably where we could consider the maintenance. I agree. It's not like you're in the process of asking for forgiveness, kind of reflecting. It's like, well, this is just what I do now. This is just principles in which I live my life. And so what are those steps to get us there?
Yeah. And so before we get 10 through 12, of course, I wanted to mention the critical 8 and 9, right? Where 8 is made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Right. And then step 9 is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And so steps 8 and 9, again, I would consider those kind of preparation and action, because you are now, not only are you writing these things out on paper, you are now approaching people that you have harmed. You're approaching people, whether that's directly, again, the key here is when to do so, except when to do so would injure them. So talking with your sponsor,
I didn't know that hit so hard, Brian. I think we all struggle with the idea and have points in our life of like, I want to apologize this person, but who am I doing it for? Is this for me? And if I bring this up, or if I haven't seen this person in 10 years, is it going to fuck them up more than the apology is worth? And that is a cluster, man. I remember I had a really rough breakup with my 6-year college girlfriend. And after 10 years of difference, I wanted to reach out to be like, I never got to say thank you for all the good times. The breakup was brutal. And I reflected for years on whether I was doing it for me or if it would mean anything to her. And when you said that, it was like, whoa. Because I think that any of us are inherently narcissistic or inherently just trying to do the right thing. And you're like, okay, I need to apologize. Yeah. It's like in your own heart and mind and soul, sure. But like to them, like we got to think, and that's a really nice exercise in thinking about the other person's perspective and putting yourself in their shoes, which is a huge part of any growth.
Right. Yeah. And like, I mean, for me, for those steps, I had quite the list, and, I reviewed the list with my sponsor, and there were like with my ex-wife, I did not try to hunt her down and try to call her. And it wasn't the right thing to do it for me. It would have been such a long time that, I don't think it would have been helpful for either party. And so what my sponsor had me do is I wrote a letter, like a letter of amends to my ex-wife. And I read that out loud to my sponsor, and we just kind of processed it and reviewed it, unpacked that a little bit more, like, to whom is this for? Who is it for me? Is it for the other person? And honestly, in my experience, I think the literature will say too, it's really so we can get rid of that stuff, right? So we can, again, I'm saying the word surrender, but so we can let it go, so we can accept, like you said, the acceptance of this is what happened, right? And I'm now just kind of, I'm getting it out. I'm doing what I can do in my own, I guess, perspective of how do I actually let go of this?
I like to lean on this statement with patients and friends and shit myself. Like, there's never a wrong time to tell the truth. And so if you're in this situation where you're like, I've been sitting on this and it's eating at you and it seems maybe like it's too late, it doesn't matter. Nothing's going to change if you don't look at it, you don't process it, you don't face that fear, stop avoiding whatever it is. And so I really like that, Brian. Like, there's never a wrong time to tell the truth, even if it seems in the past. If it's in your heart and on your mind, it's worth your time.
Yeah. And, I think, again, I don't know exactly where it is in the big book, but it talks about like resentments being like the number one killer, or issue with alcoholics, and so if I'm not working through this and I'm not actually acknowledging this and bringing it to the light, then yeah, I'm probably going to harbor those resentments, and that's going to fester, right? That's going to fester, and it's going to eat me up. I think you said that, it's going to, and it could cause me to go into headspaces that just aren't healthy, which can be like kind of a pre-lapse,
right,
to a relapse, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah.
Exactly. It makes tons of sense. So, yeah, that hit really directly. So maybe we all listening should hear these 10 through 12s pretty strongly, because I bet there's going to be things that all of us should take away.
Well, it's funny you say that. And again, I'm thinking of Tradition 11, so I'm not promoting, just hoping that it attracts, because I don't care what problem you have. We all got them of some sort, right? If someone would be willing to take their problem and say, well, maybe I'll give the 12 steps a shot with this issue, I think it could be an enlightening experience. And I know there's going to be a question later where it says, does AA work for everyone? And my short answer is no, it doesn't. Just like any program, I don't think there's like the magic pill, right, that will work, whatever that means. But I would challenge folks to take whatever is kind of challenging in their lives and run it through the 12 steps. But anyway, we can get through the steps 10, 11, 12, where, again, I kind of conceptualize that as action and even maintenance stage of change, right? Step 10, continued, right? There's that word right there, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will and the power to carry that out. And then step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So you can kind of hear that language in there, right? Continue to take, practice in all, right? So that's where that maintenance stage comes in.
I'm hearing, self-reflection, self-awareness, accountability, honesty, vulnerability, like, hey, continuing to make sure you know what you're feeling, taking care of it, owning it, attacking it. And I really like, Brian, you mentioned this earlier, outside of the very beginning steps that are kind of like admit, we're powerless. Most of these are very active. They're not passive principles. It sounds very much like this is something you're supposed to be doing, not like letting happen, not observing, right? You're doing something, which I think is important for men specifically, and maybe not just men, but something like that has that component for the people who, really want to feel like they're in the driver's seat of their own recovery.
Yeah, you make a great point about the program. It's a program of action. Maybe that's why for me, it is very attractive, because I'm a man, and I like to see results. I like to put my head down and drive through something. Now, I'm not saying that's the way to work the steps, because there's no right way to work the steps. You could do it in a month, you could do it in 2 years, right? But I like to kind of see something tangible, like, okay, I did this, I worked through this, I'm feeling like okay about this, I can move on. And so, it is a program of action, and it's a program of commitment and accountability for sure.
That's cool, Brian. And you're in a unique position here where you both lead AA groups and group therapy within a rehab center. So what are the differences? I honestly, my AA experience comes from a TV show called Loudermilk. I don't know if you've seen. It was short-lived, where Ron Livingston plays a recovering addict who leads AA groups. And my thought was like, this does not feel all that different than like psychodynamic group therapy or like a men's group with that kind of focus. So what do you see as some of the main differences?
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about that. And I'll start with how you even introduced, like, I lead AA groups. So I want to be very clear that, like, per the AA group conscience, like, there's really not leaders per se. Like, there's not a position of leadership, if you will.
Oh, okay.
There are, people can become leaders by serving the fellowship, whether that's, setting up the chairs, pouring the coffee, doing, taking the minutes at the group conscience meeting. Leading groups, that is something that we as a fellowship really want people to kind of step into and volunteer for. So I do lead groups because I enjoy it, and I think that's, for me, that's step 12. That's my service, right? That's giving back. We can't give away what we don't have, carrying on the message, all that stuff, right? So being of service is a critical component to my own recovery. That would be one distinction, is like, there's not like I don't know, like a spreadsheet of people that are like, oh, these are the folks that lead AA groups. It's really,
it's maybe more like an organizer, if you guys or somebody who's running point that meeting. But in group therapy, as an example, there is a leader. There is a clinician or two, that are guiding the process. Now, a great group therapy group runs itself once you get to that point with people. But yeah, this kind of a situation, right? It's like, well, none of us are theoretically more trained, maybe more experienced and have been here longer, but not necessarily above anyone else or in charge.
Right. And so to talk about like the difference of like what a leader looks like in a clinical setting, a group therapy setting, let's just take the process group, for example, right? In an AA meeting, you hear this, one of the group norms is no crosstalk, right? So when someone shares, no one's interrupting. Well, we hope no one's interrupting, right? If they're honoring the group conscience, they're not interrupting. They're not giving feedback. They're not even asking the person, hey, do I have permission to comment on your share? None of that. You share, you're done, you move on. Group therapy, process group, very different, right? Interpersonal communication, interpersonal effectiveness. In my process groups, I encourage respectful crosstalk, but it's invitational based, it's permission based. So if someone wants to comment, I really encourage that dialogue of, hey, I noticed you said this and this kind of, I heard this. I'm wondering if I can ask a question about that, just to kind of create healthy dialogue and to give people the opportunity to, as you said, to really
learn
run the group
and grow
and move towards a healthy working group. Yeah.
It's so interesting, Brian. It feels like impossible for me to like hold that no crosstalk like standard. Like you'd have to tape my fucking mouth shut in an AA meeting to be like, wait. We're not here to like, we're here to help each other this way, but like not grow like, I don't even know that I could distinguish those things. I'm sure it's hard for you as somebody who lives in both worlds.
It's funny, Stephen, you mentioned that because I had such resistance about that in the beginning. And I've come to appreciate the different formats. I really have. I like my meeting. I like my fellowship meeting where I can go in and be among people that get it, that struggle with the same thing I struggle with, that, we do a reading, our comments, our own personal comments can, pertain to that reading, or maybe we're just getting current with our recovery and, just being heard, and so it's kind of nice where there isn't that, but I had resistance at
where
first.
You're not going there to be like, oh shit, someone's going to pick me apart. I'm going to have homework. You're just like, I'm just going to get support, to be around other people, to not feel alone with this week. Or I know some people go to multiple meetings a week, depending on where they're at in the process. Brian, I think those are some really useful and thoughtful differences, between group therapy and AA. On that same train, like, what are some of the common misconceptions about AA?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me would be the understanding, or maybe in this case, misunderstanding of the God concept, And sometimes maybe folks feel like you have to have a certain understanding for this to work, I mean, I would argue that whatever your understanding is of a higher power, if it's going to work for you in your recovery and you're moving towards wellness and health and sobriety, then run with it, right? I think the misconception is sometimes I think maybe because it was developed in the 1930s, some of the language might seem out of date or archaic in some ways. But I think it's really maybe the pressure of thinking that, man, I have to come into this thing with this complete, clear understanding of what my higher power is. And if I don't, then I'm not going to feel like I fit in. So I would think that would be one of the main ones.
Yeah. And what do you see? I mean, in a world where, my generation is decreasingly religious, do you see changes? Have you seen different ways that people, and you're not speaking for the whole group, but even individuals, like define that higher power concept? Are you noticing trends or anything along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, some folks will kind of use the group as their higher power, like, their home group, the meeting, the people in AA as their higher power. Some people will use like a principle, like maybe honesty. Like honesty is going to be my higher power. And so I'm kind of submitting to that idea of being rigorously honest in radically honest in everything I do. And so, kind of talking about this, idea of a higher power, spirituality versus religion, maybe we can kind of segue into that, because I think, spirituality, this can be a contentious, area of how do we define spirituality? How do we define religion? So I'm just going to kind of give you my personal and very
I'm not
concise,
good at defining the differences. I ask people this all the time.
Yeah. So the way I define spirituality is like, it's a belief or expression of one's self apart from anything that has to do with just their own body, mind, and soul, right? It's something or someone that is apart from them that they are pushing forward to in order to find joy, fulfillment, happiness, freedom. So that's kind of my idea of spirituality. Religion is kind of like, so incorporating that person's belief about spirituality. Now it's like a specific or particular system or practice or order of worship to that person's faith tradition. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I think that spirituality, as I would take my collective definition that I've come across over the years, is about connectedness. If you can believe that there is something more than each of us as individuals, born from our mothers and dead in the dirt, that there is something or some ways in which we are connected more than that. And look, you go over time, that is not unique to any part of humanity as we've developed. Native Americans had their version of it over here. Asian, historically over there, African tribes over there, like every part of humanity as it's developed has had a spirituality component. And for the most part, there's also been religious components, right? The structure that's come, but the spirituality came very early on. So, that's always made sense to me as people explain it, even as I myself am not a strongly religious or spiritual person. I'm like, well, shit, man, this has been in writings and readings for thousands of years all over the world. There's got to be something there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you use that word connection, because I missed that, because sometimes, like in my process groups, we'll do like a quick check-in of kind of body, mind, or body, soul, spirit. And the question I asked about spirituality is like, how are you connecting with something or someone outside of yourself today? That's really what it is. Connecting with something or someone outside of yourself, whatever that is.
And I love, how much of this stuff crosses right over into things we all do in therapy practice, or I do in therapy practice. When you were talking about like people using their other things for their higher power, I ask people all the time to be checking in with their own moral compass. If this does not fit, if this does not feel good, if how you're acting, how you're communicating, how you're living does not feel like it aligns with who you are and the way you'd like to live, then that means something. And so I really think, if I were in these shoes, that's probably what I would do, is like that power is like the feeling I get, the feelings that I attach to, treating people well, treating people kindly, trying to be a good force in the world, all that kind of stuff. So it sounds like that's a pretty, a pretty smooth way of thinking about that. And again, it's interesting, Ryan, like my generation is, decreasingly religious, as we've said. And I don't think that says anything about our moral compass or values, at least amongst my large subset of friends.
And, I kind of tying it back into like the steps as well. Like I can see this lining up really well, because working the steps, you'll hear it when the miracle happens. Like, when is the miracle going to happen?
I saw that at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. When am I going to find this connection with my higher power, or just connection with whatever your concept is of that, right? And so that's why continuing to work the steps, it's my hope that people have that spiritual experience, and then are able to practice these principles in all our affairs. And to your point about this, like this moral compass, I love that, because if someone, like you said, if something just doesn't feel right, if something feels off, that's giving you information, right? It's not like, you don't need to judge yourself or condemn yourself for feeling what you're feeling. That's where I think the steps is so beneficial, because you can kind of slow down and actually work through an actionable program that helps you identify, well, why am I feeling that way? Let me inventory that. Let me call my sponsor. Let me kind of bring this up in a meeting and just get it out. And so, it's just, I think it works really well.
We almost missed this. Tell us about the sponsor process.
Yeah, the sponsor process, man. A critical component of working the steps. And I say critical because it's an accountability. It's an added accountability into your recovery. And it's somebody that, you're going to work closely with. And the sponsor's job, because I sponsor folks, the sponsor's job is to simply help somebody work the steps. That's it. I know it sounds simple. I mean, it can be more complicated than that, but it's not my job to own that person's recovery. It's not my job to call that person. It's not my job to really worry over that person. And that's a hard thing for me. Yes, I have concern for people. I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't have compassion
Of
for
course.
people. But I have to practice healthy boundaries around that, because that'll fall into like my codependent tendencies if I start feeling like, well, I'm responsible for this person's recovery. So the sponsor's job is to simply help the person work through the steps, whether that's a meeting with them weekly, giving them assignments, working through the big book with them, helping them understand what the steps even are. Yeah. So very important.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not truly, if you're doing it the way that it's intended, it's not really up for interpretation the way the support should be. And
Right.
you brought up those boundaries. I smiled. I'm sure this is humans after all, that these relationships get so messy, and the amount of just human factor of like, you feel responsible for this person, you feel like you let them down, you feel guilt and shame, which drives so much negative emotion in humans. Do you ever have to do you shed your sponsor when you've gotten a certain length of time? Like, you don't need a
You can.
sponsor?
Well, you can definitely fire your sponsor,
Well,
or
fair.
if you're a sponsee, you can ask, say, hey, I think I'm going to look for another sponsor. And that's where it can become a little messy, just because, people might become hurt and offended. But, honestly, it's really not about that. It's about a good fit, paralleling this to a therapeutic relationship, which is not. I'm going to be very clear about that. It's not. We're not developing a therapeutic alliance. We're developing an alliance, but not a therapeutic one. But yeah, if it's just not a good fit, then we encourage folks to find somebody else. And this is where, my clinical mindset can kind of butt up against this a little bit, because if I'm just being honest, I think sometimes, I'm probably guilty of this too. I am, because I'm an imperfect human being. My values have spilled out a little bit more than I would want them to. And maybe I even impressed on somebody my values and kind of encouraged them to go a certain direction with beliefs and things like that, which is not the right thing to do. And so I'm very aware of that. I mean, through my own training, when I'm in a therapeutic relationship, I'm very aware of that. And I bracket that real quick and set it aside and work through it later in supervision or something. But that's a very distinct difference, I would say, of having clinical experience, I think, is a plus to being a sponsor. And it can also be, for me, dangerous, because I'm very upfront with people, as far as anonymity goes. Once I develop a close relationship with my sponsee, I tell them what I do. And I'm very clear. I'm like, I will not, to the best of my ability, have my therapist hat on when we do this stuff. Because part of my sponsor relationship is I do tell them my story, and I don't really leave anything out, And so in therapy, as you know, we don't do that. We do self-disclose a little bit. Obviously that's up to each clinician and how they do that and how they use it for the benefit of the patient or client or whatever. Sponsorship for me is different. I allow that as an opportunity to tell everything, most everything, not everything.
Yeah.
I don't even tell my own therapist everything, man. Are you kidding me? Yeah,
Whoa. We're going to take you speaking of working the steps, we'll go back to session 1 of the podcast, Brian. You can start all the way over it's our therapy is the laboratory to tell the truth. Now, I get it. It's true. I can think of my own therapy. There's times where it's like, am I going to say this out loud? Am I going to say this out loud? And when my patients let those things out that they're ashamed of, to make sure that it's out of their head and let me hold it for them, you make sure you give them a lot of credit, because it's I know that was hard to say. I know you did not want to say that. I will take that from you and hold it, because that's what's, so important about that therapeutic alliance.
Right.
Okay. Second to last question, just from my lens, what's up with the chips?
So the sobriety chips, yes, the 24-hour chip, the month, the 2 month, the year, these are milestones, right? These are milestones in someone's recovery, which, if someone wants a chip, let's say they have 24 hours of sobriety, they want a 24-hour chip, in a meeting, we'll take the chip, each person will get a chance to just kind of hold it and maybe say their own quiet prayer or give it energy or whatever they want to do. They'll pass it around. The individual will get the chip, get a hug or two from some of the members. And it's just a way to recognize where they're at in recovery.
So you don't trade them. You don't pass
No.
in one for the other. Okay.
Here's my 1 year chip. I'll take your 24 hours. No. For me, I try not to get too wrapped up in the days, because if I get wrapped up in the days, that's obsessive for me. And that's dangerous territory for me, because then if for whatever reason I slip, I knowing myself, I'm going to come down so hard on me. It's going to negate all the recovery capital that I had built over the years. And I just know that's how I'll probably react. And so I honor the chips. I honor the sobriety, the length of time that I have. And I try not to get too attached to it, just like anything else, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to become my idol, right?
What about, this is what I wanted to wrap with. How about those like offshoots of AA? So we, NA, narcotics, but I think Al-Anon is a pretty unknown program too. So any thoughts on some of those other resources for people?
Yeah, there's Al-Anon, there's NA, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Overeaters, Codependency. I mean, you name it. There's so many out there. I mean, I don't even know how many.
Are they
Probably
like
hundreds.
associated? Is there a grander organization?
So they get, if it's a 12-step program, right? They have to get permission from AA, because AA was like the, Bill W. and Dr. Bob were the founding members of this. So if they're working the 12 steps, yeah, technically they should get permission from, the AA organization. And then, yeah, I mean, as far as like the format of like the steps, they should remain true to what the 12 steps always have been. You're just replacing the word, alcoholic with something else. And yeah, there's a ton out there. I mean, you can go online in your area and type in whatever 12-step program you're looking for, and chances are you'll find some in the area.
And then touch on Al-Anon.
Alcoholics Anonymous for the family member, right? Yeah, so the Al-Anon, that's strictly for family members. So family members, friends, loved ones who are supporting somebody through their alcohol addiction. Or, I mean, there's Nar-Anon. Like, so these other Anons, right, can be lined up with whatever fellowship we're talking about, whether it's AA, NA, so on and so forth. So again, it's very similar. The format's similar. Finding freedom and joy and just a new way of living apart from maybe that person that you've been trying to support and you're just lost, right? So you're finding support, you're finding fellowship, you're finding a program, an actionable program that'll help you work through these steps with the issue. Maybe the issue is like, yeah, maybe it is codependency. Maybe it is enabling. Maybe it is whatever, right? That has to do with your relationship with your loved one. And yeah, they'll normally, again, we encourage folks in Al-Anon to get sponsors and work through the steps just the same as someone in AA.
Let's say we've got either a family member or a person here who thinks that A may be something they need. How would you go about finding a group to start?
Same kind of deal. I mean, there's you can go online and search up Al-Anon. That's Al-Anon. I think there's it's alanon.org. I can look it up right now. But yeah, you'll find groups within your area, and I think
AA stuff too, just as simple as just start with a Google search in your area. And
yeah, I'm on it right now. It's alanon.org, al-anon.org. That's Al-Anon. And yeah, you can click on the meetings tab and you can just plug in your location and you can start finding meetings. And yeah, you'll call or email the person that maybe the point of contact is, introduce yourself. That's what I'd recommend. I mean, you can always just show up, right? When I go to a new meeting, though, I'll normally reach out to the point of contact and just introduce myself and say, hey, I'm planning on showing up at whatever, the 6 p.m. meeting.
Brian, thank you so much. Brian and the kids were sick this week, so I really want to thank him for rallying and being able to join us. All right, Brian, thank you so much. And yeah, thanks everybody. If you're interested in AA or Al-Anon, it sounds like it's a quick Google search to start wrapping your head around. So I appreciate y'all, and we'll be back to introduce a new BHoF member soon.
All right.
As we celebrate and honor the life of a true American hero this week, it is my honor to induct Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into the Bromotions Hall of Fame this week. Born Michael King Jr., January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. His father, Michael Sr., was an outspoken reverend as well around civil rights, and a staunch activist. Took a visit to Germany when MLK was 5 and ended up changing his name to Martin Luther to honor the priest, and changed his son's name as well. That's how we got MLK Jr. In April of 1944, his junior year of high school, King gave his first public speech as a member of the speech and debate team in an oratorical context. He stated, "Black America still wears chains. The finest Negro is at the mercy of the meanest white man." So we knew where MLK was heading, as this was even 20 years prior to the I Had a Dream speech. And he graduated high school at age 15 and decided to enroll at Morehouse College, a historically black college in Atlanta. Prior to enrolling that summer, he went up to Connecticut in a university-funded program where him and his friends were going to work on a farm. He relayed to his parents about the trip. He was amazed that as he got north of Washington, that it was a non-segregated area. Said that he could dine in the finest restaurants in Hartford, shocked that Negroes and whites went to the same church. It was an eye-opening experience for Dr. King. Following his time at Morehouse College, he earned a Bachelor of Divinity at Crozier Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, and then a PhD in Systematic Theology from Boston University, hence the doctor. Our second Bachelor of Divinity in the BHoF, Mr. Rogers being the first. After graduating with his doctorate, he went to become the pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, where he was tabbed by leadership to coordinate the Montgomery bus boycotts in 1955. Yes, this was following Rosa Parks' famous incident where she was asked to sit in the back of the bus and refused to do so. This garnered so much attention that in 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled bus segregation unconstitutional. Following that, King founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as a platform to understand civil rights, spread the word, get people together, visiting India in 1959 to meet Gandhi, where he really solidified his nonviolent stance, thinking we need to find ways to do this within the system and that violence is not going to get us where we want to go. He was arrested following the lunch counter sit-ins in Birmingham, Alabama, where he penned the famous letter from Birmingham jail, which is still considered one of the most important pieces in American civil rights history. In August 63, he led the historic March on Washington in the I Have a Dream speech, where we famously most know him from, which led to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the same year, where he was also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still widely considered the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction itself, where it prohibited discrimination in public places and schools and also federally funded programs, made it illegal to discriminate based on race, religion, color, or sex in hiring practices, promoting and firing, all things that are very important to our world today. 1965, he led the famous March to Selma, promoting voting rights acts for African Americans, and this led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which banned discrimination of voting rights based on color. After the Civil Rights Act, he was really shifting his focus to war and poverty, which is why he was in Memphis in 1968 supporting workers' protest rights when he was shot and killed on the balcony of the hotel where he was staying. Really shook up the country, led to race riots all across the country, and really changed the pulse of the civil rights movement at that time in America. Posthumously, King was recognized in 1977 with a Presidential Medal of Freedom. 1983, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was established as a national holiday, and in December 1999, MLK was voted in a Gallup poll as the second most admired person of the 20th century. For fun, number one was Mother Teresa, MLK, JFK, and then Albert Einstein. Guys, I know that I've had the opportunity to work in African-American communities as a school teacher before I went to medical school, and some of those moments really opened my eyes as a person who went to a mostly white school growing up and probably really didn't understand how the nation still at large struggles to achieve the kind of goals that Dr. King himself was working towards. Let's see this week if we make sure to take some time. I want to play for you a few minutes of MLK's I Have a Dream speech, emphasizing a few parts of the speech that are not just the part about his 4 little children. So listen up.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Well, Dr. King, we share the same dream. We'll be back after the break to wrap up the show. let's wrap up this show as we do in citing our sources. We used NFL.com and Walter Payton Man of the Year nominees to emphasize that and get us some background work on knowing those guys. Really, really cool stuff to think about the charity work they do and all the good impact they have in the community. Brian was quoting the big book and maybe the smaller big book. You can go back to the interview to see some of those resources he used, but a lot of those resources are going on 100 years old now, and super cool that it's still helpful for everybody in the AA world. Finally, with MOK, I used the Britannica Encyclopedia. No, I did not go home to my parents and go to the basement where those encyclopedias are still sitting. I got on the internet version and looked up some information. And also we referenced that Gallup poll. That's an organization who does those big polls. Our 3 takeaways from this week. 1, to start, I like what I figured out during that, which is the guys who are in the league a long time tend to be good guys. Take care of their mentals, take care of their physicals, take care of the other people around them. It helps them live good, healthy, happy lives where they can thrive in their careers, their communities, and in their relationships. 2, with Brian, I learned a ton about AA. I think one of the main features of AA that I learned that I was unaware of, which is you can come at any point in the cycle to get help with addiction treatment. At the beginning, in the middle, at the end, every time is worth your time and attention. And AA is one of those resources that has it all for us. Finally, with MLK, wrap as I think we would in this show. I think MLK would support our cause here and say, let's give everybody the chance to be judged by the content of their character. All right, what a great episode. We're going to finish up the addiction block next week, working with some friends of ours who own a transitional housing facility out here in Colorado called Ananeo. And that is transitional housing means you're either homeless or you've gotten out of prison recently and you're looking for help getting back on your feet. It's going to be a great episode as it feeds into the addiction block. And as we do, everybody, we'll end our week with our mind, as Dr. King would want us to, on being kinder and gentler out there. See y'all next time.